For every Josh Allen or Russell Wilson type fantasy player, the guys that are exceeding expectations in every way, there are players that are the complete opposite, failing to live up to the hype that surrounded them just a month or two ago. Whether it be due to their team underperforming or just them not being able to live up to the hype, they are by almost every definition through a few weeks a fantasy bust. We're going to discuss several players like that in today's video, and what we will discuss is players underperforming, not big name players that have been injured. Christian McCaffrey, Saquon Barkley, and Michael Thomas are not fantasy busts because they cannot be controlled being injured. It's just a part of the game, and it's especially a part of the game in a year where there was no preseason. Enough of that though, and as usual, before we get started, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as all support is very much appreciated. Now let's begin. And we start today's video with Odell Beckham of the Browns. Through 3 games, Odell has just 155 yards and 1 touchdown. For a full 16-game season, this puts him on pace for just 826 yards, which is a far cry from the player he was in New York. I'm not huge on Odell to begin with, but for him to perform this bad really does say something. Not surprisingly, he was held below 50 yards against the Ravens, as the talk and the hype about Marlon Humphrey, who by the way just received a huge contract extension, is 100% deserved, and he is truly a shutdown corner. What is surprising though, is Odell didn't exactly eat against the Bengals and the football team like some probably expected him to. Neither of those teams have outstanding secondaries where it can be justified or make sense of it, or him not performing should I say. Those should have been games where Odell would be able to pad his stats and for him to look like the receiver he used to be. John Brown of the Bills has 3 less receiving yards in a little over 2 games played, and I feel like that's all that needs to be said. Odell is not only a fantasy bust through a few games, but he simply isn't the receiver he used to be. And if you're watching this and are a fan of Odell, then I don't think you can even deny it either. Odell has 2 games with 4 catches and 1 with 3 to start the year, despite being targeted 22 times. Having just a 50% catch rate is unacceptable, and is not good by any stretch of the imagination, much less for a player of his magnitude. The Browns are trying to force the ball to Odell, but he simply isn't coming through. He needs to be better than what he currently is if this team has any postseason aspirations. And next is a player who I would say has been a disappointment so far, but not necessarily a fantasy bust, and that's Marquise Brown of the Ravens. Hollywood has 18 targets through 3 weeks, with 6 exactly in each game, and it translated to 12 catches for 156 yards. What I do think is concerning for him so far is the touchdowns, or should I say lack of. He had 7 of those as a rookie, and through nearly a quarter of his sophomore season, he has 0. They play the football team this Sunday, and after the game they had against the Chiefs, I fully expected to be a beatdown in the nation's capital. This could be Hollywood's first huge game of the year, as the problem he, along with everyone else not named Lamar in that offense face, is how many weapons there are to deal with and how many mouths there are to feed. But for a player that is expected to take a big step in 2020, a 2-catch, 13-yard performance is very disappointing, and to be fair to Hollywood specifically, Lamar through the air was very disappointing against the Chiefs on Monday night. Brown is currently on pace for 64 catches for over 830 yards, and with a 2 for 13 game being in those projections, I feel like that can only go up. The Ravens' next 3 games are at Washington, Cincinnati at home, and at Philly, and with how those teams have played so far, these next 3 games will be very telling. I love Marquise, and his limit is as high as he wants it to be. Him and Lamar have potential for the next decade to be a great quarterback-wide receiver duo, and I hope we especially see that in the next couple of games. And next is Bengals running back Joe Mixon. Now, this isn't entirely his fault, and I want everyone to know that, as the Bengals' offensive line is absolutely atrocious. Mixon had a great 2019 as he rushed for over 1,100 yards, averaged 4.1 yards per carry, and was a bright spot on an otherwise terrible Bengals team. However, to start the year, he is averaging just 3.2 yards per carry and has 0 rushing touchdowns through 3 games. Joe Burrow, like Mixon, has felt the effects of the horrendous line play that the Bengals have had and has been sacked 14 times through the first 3 weeks. Quarterback sacks aren't a stat that's talked about all that often, as in how many times a quarterback is sacked from the offensive standpoint. To be clear, pass rusher sacks in the statistical sense are always talked about. Anyways, 14 in 3 weeks is horrendous, and not surprisingly, the Bengals' poor offensive line play has translated over to the running back's yards per carry. Due to the offensive line, Mixon has been a fantasy disappointment so far. For dynasty leagues, he does have great value, as they will only get better with time, the Bengals' offensive line that is, but for the 2020 season league, it is not a Joe Mixon year. The team is too young, and the offensive line is isn't good, and because of that, Mixon has suffered and will continue to do so. And next is Daniel Jones of the New York Giants. Jones in his rookie year was solid, as he had 24 touchdown passes, had some great moments like his debut against the BUSTS for example, and looked like he was going to prove the critics wrong of the number 6 overall pick. However, in his sophomore season, it's been a lot more of a slump for him than it had been stardom, as heading into the year there was a lot to look forward to that just hasn't been there through the first 3 games. This is the same guy who had as many touchdown passes as Tom Brady did in 2019, and his weapons weren't all that great either. Saquon was injured for a lot of last year and wasn't his same self for a good chunk of the year. The biggest thing for Daniel Jones is how much he turns the ball over. There's plays where he will look great and look like the top 10 pick he was, and then he'll force a ball or just flat out make a bad play and leave you with your head scratching. Jones has 6 turnovers in 3 games and has just 2 passing touchdowns to combat the turnovers. He has yet to have a 300-yard passing game, which will change over the course of the season, but it has been a disappointing start to year number 2. His weapons are relatively the same, so it's not like he is a quarterback on a new team where in a worldwide pandemic, no preseason year, it would be excused or at the very least understandable for his struggles. This has been a horrendous start for him, and it probably won't get better this week as they play at the Rams, who are playing great unlike Daniel Jones' Giants. And we wrap today's video up with Eagles quarterback Carson Wentz. Carson and the Eagles have been nothing short of disappointing to start the year, as they are 0-2-1, which includes double-digit losses to the football team and the Rams. Not only that, but Carson Wentz has looked bad in his play, as he has 3 touchdowns to 6 interceptions and a passer rating of 63.9. He has not only been a fantasy disappointment, but a disappointment to Eagles fans too. He is under contract right now that will pay him $107 million in guarantees and nearly $130 million in total, and simply put, he isn't getting it done. Wentz is at a pivotal point in his career as he needs to perform, not only for the sake of the Eagles season as they are only half a game out of first place, but for the sake of his career. I've said this before and I'll say it again, but at the end of the day, Carson Wentz has no playoff wins as a starter. He has had the injury-prone label placed on him, and what isn't fair to Wentz is how much or how little help he has at the wide receiver position. There was a point on Thursday where the Eagles had one wide receiver practicing on their entire 53-man roster, courtesy of Bleacher Report. We've all heard of the injury bug, and it's all hit our teams at one point or another point in time, but the injury animal has hit the Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver room the past 2 years. And not only that, but the receivers he has to work with simply aren't that good. A 33-year-old Deshaun Jackson shouldn't be one of any quarterback's top receiving options in 2020, but he is for Wentz. Wentz needs to be better, don't get me wrong, but football is a team game, and he will need his receivers to step up too. And with that being said, that's all I have for today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you ever have a video suggestion, please let me know in the comments. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time. Have a great weekend. Skol.